Thank you so much for coming today. Today we'll talk about our continuous localization platform that we built in Evernote. So at Evernote, every month we translate about 15,000 words per month. 25% of those words are software strings, our different clients for different platforms, mobile, web, and desktop. And 75% is marketing materials. I'm talking here about our marketing website, about Zendesk knowledge base, and about various types of other marketing materials which we store in Google Docs. We translate all that stuff into 25 languages. These are the paid languages. In addition to that, we use some help from volunteers who also translate one more language currently, like fully supported by volunteers. And volunteers also help us improve languages, improve translations. They report bugs or provide suggestions on our translation server. So all of that is managed by a group of 3 people. I overlook the entire process. I work as a globalization/localization engineer and set up and maintain the infrastructure, the automation infrastructure. We have one localization manager who also does some engineering work, who also does some localization QA, and who manages the team of our translators. We have our translators. They technically are freelancers. They are contractors working from all over the globe. So he's today here, so you can ask him questions after the talk if you want to about some localization management stuff. We also have one software engineer who helps us improve our online translation server. So how come the small group of people can handle the agile process that we have at Evernote, and we simultaneously ship all our products in all our languages? So the answer is that our process is fully automated, which means that by design it is agile and it is scalable. I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say that we can probably increase the number of languages twofold without even increasing the headcount of our department. This is because everything is automated. The process is agile because whenever software engineers commit something to our version control system, this information gets published for translation, and when translators provide their translations, their work is automatically and almost immediately is integrated into the product for QA. So at the heart of our continuous localization is Serge. Serge is the software that we built for 8 years now, and the name stands for String Extraction and Resource Generation Engine. Sorry. So what Serge is, at the very top level, Serge synchronizes your source code repositories with the translation server. So when engineer commits a string into an English resource file, Serge monitors that change and updates strings, adds new strings, or removes obsolete strings from our translation server. When someone provides a new translation or edits an existing one, Serge monitors that change and populates that change back into the version control. So this process is really smooth and really it works for us pretty well, but that covers only 25% of software strings. So what about the marketing materials? We came up with a solution for that. So what currently we are doing is that we store all our marketing materials like blog posts in Google Docs. Then we have a script which downloads all the documents in a special shared folder inside Google Docs, converts them to XML files, and pushes them to version control. This means that we can handle translation of the marketing materials exactly the same way as we do with software strings. The same happens with Zendesk knowledge base articles, which we download using their official API and store them as XML files and process using the same tool set. So from interaction standpoint, Serge is a simple command line tool. There's nothing fancy about it. It doesn't have very many dependencies. It doesn't require to install any database software. You can run it continuously on your dedicated localization server, but you can as well run that on your local machine if you are a localization engineer and you want to configure Serge. If you want to write configuration files for it, you can run it on your local machine as well. So configuration files is the essence of Serge. What you do as a localization engineer, you create those files just once for your localization project, for a set of files, for a set of files for a specific software client, for example. Then you test them locally using your copy of Serge. And then once the configuration file is prepared, you put that on your localization server. There, Serge runs continuously against each configuration file in a specified folder and runs this localization cycle. So it runs continuously. It periodically generates or updates translation interchange files and pushes them to your translation server. It periodically updates and pushes localized resource files back into the version control. And those commits from our localization robot trigger continuous integration builds, which means that multiple times a day we can get the fresh build with all the translations incorporated. We can test this. We can send it to our translators for review, for example. How Serge differs from the other automation API which modern vendors provide. So first of all, it's good to see that more and more localization vendors do provide their APIs. And they claim that this improves the ways that people can integrate with them and their clients can build the continuous integration. But that is not exactly true, and I will explain why. So localization providers always work in terms of translation jobs. Basically, what they say is, give us a file or a bunch of files, tell which languages you want them to be translated into, and then wait for some time, then we will give you the translated files back. So APIs which they provide, they almost always fully fall into the same paradigm of translation jobs. So for example, you are translating an iOS application and you send a bunch of strings files to the localization vendor. And while they are translating that stuff, you suddenly realize that you need to change something in your strings files. So what do? Do you need to create another job? Do you need to send all the files again and probably charge twice for the same strings? Or should you create a diff file somehow and send only the differences? But then if those differences will be translated by translators, will they have enough context to translate them? Because they will be outside of the entire file. So if you want to use APIs that localization vendors provide, like by themselves, you always have to do some major programming around them. You basically need to merge changes back manually, because if you give a localization vendor a file in a specific format, in strings format, they will give the same format back. But what if your original source English files are changed? Now you have to merge those changes. The files that localization vendor gives you are outdated. So you still have to do some manual processing. And if a continuous or automated localization breaks every now and then probably we shouldn't call that a continuous localization at all. So Serge is different from those APIs. And one fundamental thing about Serge is that it doesn't send your original resource files for translation. What Serge does is it gathers all the strings that need to be translated, and it generates intermediate files. And those intermediate files, which we call translation interchange files, those are sent for translation. So it doesn't matter if the files are outdated when they are returned to you by the localization vendor. Serge will only parse those files, try to get the translations into the system, and based on the existing translations, And based on the master files, the files in the original language, it will reconstruct all the localized files in the original format and push them into your system. So Serge handles merging by design. Also, the good thing about Serge is that it contains all the translations in one database, and basically you own your own translation memory. You don't have to request that translation memory from your localization vendors. You don't have to merge TMs. You don't have to manage TMs at all. Basically, you automatically gather all the translations that you have. Serge is fully extensible. It's much more than simply replacing some strings in the source file with the translations. It can do some very interesting stuff, which we'll be talking about today. So to sum it up, Serge safeguards you against some common things which you would deal with, like merging or merging conflicts, and requires minimal last mile integration. So when we're talking about Serge, it's all about Serge configuration files. On our website devoted to Serge, serge.io, there's a documentation section which fully describes what these Serge configuration files are, their syntax, their format, and all the options. So at the very high level, Serge configuration file contains information about synchronization with translation service, synchronization with the version control system, and one or more actual localization jobs. What happens if you have your configuration file in place and you run a sync command against that file? So this is how the localization cycle actually looks like. So when we run Serge sync, in turn, it runs several subcommands in a specified order. First is it pulls changes from source code repositories into localizable resource files. So you store all the information locally before processing that, before parsing that. Second step is the pull TS step, is that Serge asks translation server to get all the information from that server back into the files that it created previously. Then it runs the internal localization cycle and actually parses files and updates both resource files, localizable resource files, and translation interchange files. And then it syncs the updates back to the translation server and back to the source code repositories. Let's talk about those two commands. First is for pulling changes from the version control system, and the other one for pushing changes back. So everything in Serge is plugin based. This is a very open, it has a very open architecture. Currently, Serge supports Git, Gerrit, Subversion, and Mercurial systems. And those plugins isolate you from different version control system logic and their internal commands, and also provide automatic conflict resolution so that you don't have to manually intervene and fix things for Serge. Inside configuration file, you can also specify and you can work with multiple repositories as with one logical internationalization project. How this looks in the configuration file. So this is the sync block. Inside there is a VCS subblock which tells you how to talk to the version control system. You specify that you want to use the Git plugin, and inside the data section you specify parameters for this plugin. So these parameters can differ from one plugin to another. Here we tell that we want to automatically add and commit to the version control any unversioned, any files that Serge creates. Then we specify the email and the name of the robot under which we will authorize and under which we will see the automated commits from. And we specify the local path where the local files will be stored, and one or more references to the external repositories. So when we say Serge pull and then provide the path to this configuration file, what it will do, it will check that the local path exists and then create subfolders named main and widget And in those subfolders, it will do checkouts from the external repositories. Now we have a similar pair of commands called pushTS and pullTS. These are for talking with the translation service. Currently, Serge supports only plugin for Poodle. This is the open source software where people go and actually do the translations. You can check out the Poodle website, the main project website, and you can also check out our own translation server, which is the instance of this Poodle software. But it doesn't have to be just Poodle as a translation server. You can simply upload your translation interchange files into another repository and ask your localization vendor to take those files and process them and localize them there. Or you can get some integration between the vendor's API and write a plugin that will push those files to the vendor and get the translations back. But now that you have Serge in the middle, it will isolate you from all the problems about which I talked earlier. So this is how it looks in configuration file. Here we say that we want to synchronize our data with Poodle, and the only data that we need to provide is the path to the managed PY script, which comes with Poodle. This is their command line API client, and the project ID as it is registered on the translation server. Now the core of Serge is the localize command. This is where the actual parsing and file generation happens. So what it does, so when you run Serge localize and provide the path to the configuration file, what Serge does is it scans localizable resource files and extracts strings from them and puts into the internal database. Then it scans the previously generated PO files, these are the translation interchange files, and gets all the translations that it has there and puts into the database. And then when it has all the information in the database, it can update the translation interchange files and it can update the localizable resource files. So it brings localizable resource files in sync with the original English files, and it makes sure that translation interchange files are also up to date and contain all the needed translations. What about core functionality? So Serge allows you to parse and generate different resource files. We have many plugins for different file formats. It generates and then parses translation interchange files, and for that we use the PO format, which is commonly used in open source world. But it's a very simple format, which is easy to read, which is easy to diff in the version control system. It has many built-in configuration options, like, and I will talk about them a bit later. And it has an ability to also use so-called control plugins, which modify the way Serge works. What are the configuration options? First and very basic ones is that every job has its ID, it has a reference to the source language, and has a list of destination languages in which we want to translate our files into. We can use both job ID and both languages to limit the scope of localization. So if you are, as a localization engineer, are authoring the configuration file and you want to test this configuration file on a specific job or on a specific set of languages, you can specify both languages and jobs in the command line. So this will speed up the configuration process. Serge has to know how to talk to the database. Currently, Serge supports SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres databases. But in real world, you'll probably just stick with SQLite as we do, because SQLite is the fastest solution and it works on pretty large databases. So we never had a necessity to move from SQLite to a bigger database. The good thing about SQLite is also that you don't have to configure the database, you don't have this dependency, and the only thing you need to do is just to provide a path to the database source file, and Serge will create a new database for you. This also means that you can have as many translation memory databases as you want. So if you don't want to share translations between several projects, you are free to do so, and you can just provide a path to a different database and store translations separately. If you use MySQL or Postgres, then you need to provide also a username and a password. And here you can see that inside configuration files, you can also specify so-called macros. So you can reference environment variables, and you can reference some known macros that can be used to specify a language or file path, and I will show you them in a moment. So now Serge knows where the database is. Now it needs to know what files to process. And here you specify the source directory. This is the root directory where Serge tries to scan files in. Then you tell whether you want to go into subdirectories or just scan that particular directory. And then you specify a couple of regular expressions that tell which files to match. So if the file matches, it will be processed. If it doesn't, then it will be not. And you can also provide exclusion mask for those files. If you want to, you also can specify multiple regular expressions. This is just a space-separated list. So instead of using some big regular expression for all the files, it's easier to split that into multiple regular expressions. Serge uses regular expressions pretty extensively in different parameters, and this is one of its key features and one of the powerful features of Serge. We know where to get files from. Now we want to know how to process the files, which parser to use. And for that, there's a parser section inside each job, which tells which parser plugin to use and which parameters to provide to this parser. We know where to get files from, we know how to process them, then we need to specify where to generate localized files and where to generate translation service files. So this is the set of options that allow you to do so. You specify a path to the translation interchange files, and here you also see locale, file, and lang macros that will be automatically substituted with the appropriate relative file path and locale and language. For output files, you not only specify the output file path, you can also specify the encoding and whether you want to output the byte order mark or not. For some systems, for some platforms, sometimes you want to rewrite the output language. This means that some platforms use different language naming convention than everybody else. So here in Serge, you can say that for this specific job, when you output files, then for example, the Norwegian language should be written not as NO, but as NB. And the same thing, for example, for simplified Chinese. So to sum those features up, here's a quick example. These are all the parameters that you saw in the previous slides. And this is how Serge works. So imagine that we have this configuration file, and Serge scans the root directory and finds our RC file because it matches the mask, and the path to that file is path/to/file.rc. This becomes the relative file path from which Serge calculates the value of those different macros. You can specify the full file path, you can specify the directory only, you can specify the name, extension, you can combine them, so you have full flexibility on how to name the output files. And then when Serge generates translation interchange files and localized resource files, it goes through each language. And for each language, here an example is Brazilian Portuguese, it also sets the values of the language-specific macros. Here I specify only 2, but we have like 15 or so different variants of how you can specify the language depending on locale, will be the culture, or locale should be uppercase or lowercase, so all the possible combinations. And then based on this information and based on information about the original file and its file path, Serge can construct the final file path for the translation interchange file and for output file path. This means that in your system, you will have multiple repositories. You will have many different files scattered around those repositories in different subdirectories, like a total mess. And on the other side, you will have a clean structure with PO files, which you can send to your vendor, which you can send to your own translation server, which you can simply upload to GitHub for people to download and translate offline, for example. So Serge maps everything that is in real life and in those software projects that you have with the clean structure of interchange files that you deal with. Serge is very powerful when it comes to reusing translations from its translation database. First of all, you can switch that function on and off. You can tell whether you want to reuse translations which no longer, for strings which no longer belong to any current files, for example. So if you want to use the entire database as translation memory, or just the most recent translations that you currently have. You can also specify if you want to reuse uncertain translations or not. What this means is that historically you can have one string having multiple variants of translations depending on the context. So if we have only one version of translation, we can reuse that right away. If we have multiple versions of the translation, then Serge can skip automatically substituting this translation and leave that up to translator. You can also share translations between similar languages. For example, you have Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese. You can have Latin American Spanish and European Spanish. And here in the configuration file, you can say that if there is a translation in European Spanish, but there is no translation in Latin American Spanish, we can actually use that European translation, but then we want to set a fuzzy flag on that. Fuzzy flag comes from PO files, but actually this is the flag that says that this is not a final translation, this is something that needs to be reviewed. This information, this flag is exported with PO files. It gets to your translation server. Your translators see the pre-populated translations made by Serge, but some of them need their review. So they go there, they review the strings, they clear that fuzzy flag, and then this translation becomes final. And the last but not least is that in every job you can specify one, 0 or more callback plugins, and those callback plugins implement some advanced functionality. They can control how Serge works. Before we dive into those advanced plugins and what they can do, let's talk a bit about parsers. So Serge comes with more than 20 parsers for all modern file formats that you can see in modern platforms. Some of those are marked as bold, is those about which I'll be talking today. First, PHP and XHTML Parser. So I don't think there are many localization agencies that will deal with that format, but we use that for our own website. So we have static pages. We have a PHP-based website, and what we do is we do not externalize any strings from any pages into a separate format that we'll be localizing. Instead, we're localizing just those PHP pages. So XHTML plus PHP code inside plus JavaScript code inside. You can you can extract strings from PHP code. You can extract strings from JavaScript code. You can extract strings from HTML nodes. You have full control of segmentation, and since this is a validating parser, it means that Serge can send email alerts every time the file cannot be parsed, so developers can act quickly and fix the issue. So this is the quick example of how HTML looks like and what strings will be translated automatically because they are inside paragraph tags, they are inside header tags. Some of the generic tags like span or div will not be processed by default, but you can specify so-called localization hints, which are in red, which tell you which string to translate and which string to skip. And here, an example of PHP. So if you wrap your string in a special placeholder function, which does nothing in English, but it's only used as a marker to extract strings, then those strings will be translated as well. This is how it looks in the configuration file. So you specify in the parser block that you want to use that specific parser plugin. And inside the data section, you specify the parameters. First of all, you can expand or not expand the HTML entities into their real values to somehow help the translators. You can specify whether you want to validate the output. So when the localized XHTML file is generated, we can pass this through this parser again. And if the parsing fails, then we send an email report and prevent that file from being saved. And also, you can specify the list of recipients for those email reports. Our XML parser, it allows you to localize any arbitrary nodes by providing regular expressions to match those nodes. You can also specify nodes which can be treated as HTML. So in Serge, you can basically have nested parsers. If you have HTML code inside a CData block inside XML, you can extract strings, extract some nodes from XML as well, and then from certain nodes, you can extract strings from HTML tags. Our XML parser also supports different XML flavors, which are used in Android strings or like InDesign specific XML flavor, which has to deal with white spaces a bit differently. This is a quick example. You have an XML parser. You want to localize, you want to translate title and description tags. You do not want to translate the top level description tag under products. And for description, for item descriptions, you want to treat them as HTML, as embedded in HTML and localize individual tags in it. So this is how it looks like, and this is how it looks in the configuration file. You specify the parser, you specify the data. Node match provides the regular expression to extract matching nodes that we want to translate. We want to exclude some of the nodes, and we specify the regular expression to identify which nodes should be treated as embedded HTML. Again, since this is a validating parser, you may want to send email alerts if XML is broken. So you can provide information for that as well. Master parser. So sometimes you have files which are pretty much impossible to localize properly, but you still want to automate the localization process for them. For example, some simple plain text email templates that you want to localize. So in order to segment them, what we did is a master parser, which means that we can specify some special markers around the strings which need to be translated. Example is the email plain text email template that we want to localize, and we want to segment that for proper string reuse. So what we do, and this is like a pretty much real life example from what we had in our web client and our web service. So we had those templates. What we did is, based on this English text, we would actually create a master file, and inside it we will specify the strings that need to be translated. And in addition to marking those strings, we could also specify some context, some comments for them. So based on this master file, we can generate the original English file back, and we can also extract strings and generate proper localized files. So there's nothing to configure here. You can, if you want to use this parser, you can just specify the plugin name and be set. We also have, in addition to like file format specific parsers, we also have a Metaparser plugin, which allows you to parse any arbitrary files using regular expressions just by providing regular expressions right in the configuration file. Here's a sample. This is the ini file. We see that it has key value pairs, that it has some comments above them that we also want to extract. Our purpose is to extract as much context information as possible. So for that, we can create a configuration. So we're using this Metaparser plugin, and we provide a list of regular expressions to identify each line, whether it is a key value pair, whether it is a comment line, and we can collect those different comments, different multi-line comments, and then key values, and then emit an event that this is a string that needs to be localized. Now, advanced control plugins. This is the fun part. So we've been developing Serge for 8 years. Initially, we started with pretty simple setup, pretty simple script, which we continuously improved based on different requests from various parties. So at some point, we decided that we need to use different plugins because this will be the only way to support such complex system and be able to maintain it and to develop it. So Serge, when it runs the localization cycle, it can ask different plugins whether to process certain files or not, whether to extract strings or not, whether to generate some localized files or not. And plugins can hook into those, as we call them, callback phases and provide some logic and like return some Boolean values, for example. And those plugins can test whether a file path or file content or the actual string, extracted strings matches the certain criteria. This is one of the recipes that we do not use. This is just for the demo. So imagine that you have many files in one folder, but only a few should be localized. How do you tell apart those files? So you can have inside the content of the file, you can have a special localizable marker, the actual word in all caps. And if there's such a word in this file, then you want to localize this file. Otherwise, this file should be skipped. So you can use this process if plugin. You tell that it should be attached to a specific phase, which is called can process source file. The name implies that the plugin should answer yes or no to the question. And then in this, in the data section, you provide the actual test for this condition. So if the content of the file matches this regular expression, then yes, we want to localize this file. So as you can see, the format is that you can pretty read that easily. The other recipe is what we actually use in Evernote. Many times, developer adds some new strings to the user interface wherever they want, and these and the strings that they add are actually placeholders. They do not want you to localize them yet. So this is a simple recipe which says if any strings which is about to be processed, which is about to be extracted, has 2 exclamation marks at the beginning of the string, then skip that string. Otherwise, you can translate it. So this is how it looks in the configuration file. Again, you use the same plugin, you attach it to the different phase, which is called can extract. Can we use that string? And then you provide the condition. If content doesn't match this regular expression, then okay, we can localize it. We can extract it. Replace strings plugin is used to pre-process or post-process files. It can be used to rewrite translations on the fly. It can be used to rewrite file paths before the file is actually saved. This is the example. And this is something, we use something similar on our website. So we want every website page to be aware of its locale. So we have some global file, which we localize. And inside it, we have a special global variable, which says which language is that. And by default, here in strings.js file, we have the actual definition of this variable. So we want every time the localized file is saved, we want to change that specific line and change the value of en to the actual language of that page. So we can easily use that, achieve that with the process if plugin. So we add the callback plugin and attach it to the before save localized file phase. At this phase, the plugin works with the entire content which is about to be saved. And then we specify one or more replacement rules. So these are also regular expressions which basically say what to replace and with what to replace. And inside the regular expression, you can also use macros. So depending on the localizable file, on the language of the localizable file, we will substitute the value of the lang macro with the actual value and then execute a regular expression. We have a limit languages plugin, which we also use at Evernote. It gives you an ability to specify the list of target languages on a per file basis. This saves us a ton of money because we do not want to translate every knowledge base article into every possible language. It will be insane. Some of the knowledge base articles are not that important. And some of the knowledge base articles, for example, should be translated only if we provide support in those languages, which is a subset of languages into which we translate Evernote. So this limit languages plugin allows you to specify right within that file what are the target languages for that file. By default, you can use this syntax, so you can say like L10N limit destination languages and provide the list of languages to localize the file into, or you can exclude languages from the list. So by default, the file will be translated into all languages specified in the configuration file, but for some reason, that specific file should not be translated into Japanese and simplified Chinese. The plugin is also configurable, and you can specify different rules for that. So one of the recipes is that you have special markers for special markets, and those markers have an associated list of languages with them. So by default, you want to translate the file global.js into all languages, so you provide some comment anywhere inside that file which says lang all. And inside the configuration file, you say that everything that matches, that has this marker, means that we want to translate this into all languages. You want to localize feature_x file into like European and Asian Pacific languages. So you add both markers, and it will use the combined list of languages. Another plugin is called append hint message. Hint is the same thing as a comment. So as I probably said before, we want to provide as much context to our translators as possible. So we can extract some comments from the resource files if engineers provide those comments, but sometimes we want to add something extra. So for our website, for example, we automatically generate a preview link to the page that contains this specific string. So this is how we can, and this is a screenshot of the editor, of the real editor that we have on our translation site. So this is how it works. You specify in the job that you want to use that append hint message plugin, and in data you specify one or more messages that need to be added to the comment, to the hints of the translation unit for all the files in that job. And again, you can use macros to specify the file paths and languages. So if you have a preview site, you can construct the URL to that site knowing the file path and knowing the language. You can express that here, and the file and the comment will be generated properly. One of our recent additions is the feature branch plugin. So we want to localize multiple branches easily. The problem with different feature branches is that, and this is what we currently use for our Android client, for our Evernote Android client. So you have thousands of strings in the Android client. Multiplied by a dozen feature branches, it can be like really huge amount of strings that need to be processed. We want to optimize that. We want to make sure Serge works as fast as possible. Most of the feature branches have just a few changes, just a few new strings or some altered strings. So what this plugin does is it basically creates a diff between the original, the master branch, and all the feature branches, and then exposes for translation only the strings which do not exist in the master job. So this is how it looks in the configuration file. You specify multiple feature branches. In the URL, you can specify the branch names, and then you use feature branch plugin, and the only parameter that you use is what is the ID of the job which is considered the master job from which all the strings should be processed. For that job, all the strings will be processed, but for the other jobs which inherit all those settings but have different IDs, the actual diffing algorithm will kick in, and this will result that this job will have fewer strings for exposed for translation. This example also shows you one of the nice features of our configuration plugins, which is inheritance. Instead of writing all the configuration options in every job, you can simply specify that you want to inherit all the settings from a specific section of a specific file, and then just, and on top of that, you can just override some of the properties. Transformation plugin. It guesses the translations. So we also use that, and it saves us much time because much of the time and reduces the cost of translations, because much of the time all those changes that engineers do, last-minute changes that engineers do to translations are pretty small. For example, they add some trailing dots or remove them or change the case, stuff like that. So what this transform plugin does, it tries to map the existing strings with already existing translations to the new strings. So in this example, we have the translation for the hello world with the exclamation mark into Russian, but now we suddenly see that we have a new string which is all uppercase, which doesn't have any translation. So it tries to see how it can transform the original English string into a new string, what kind of transformation does it have to do, and if it finds the path from the original string to the new string, then it applies the same set of transformations to the translations. This not only includes the punctuation, it also includes wrapper tags. So all those tiny changes that we would otherwise see, and like here and there new strings would pop up, and we will go to that string and we'll see that only a few things were changed. Now many of them are automatically translated because we use that plugin. We have a plugin that performs pseudo localization. So you can use that to test your configuration files and to provide pseudo localization for all kinds of file formats and all platforms, even if your platform does not support pseudo localization natively. So what this plugin does is that for the specified language, it will automatically translate everything you throw into it by using some special fancy symbols, which can be visually told apart from the original English strings, and it can also expand strings, and it can also do both. So this is something that we are currently integrating into our process, because previously we wouldn't do any pseudo localization. Now we do that, and we do the string expansion. It really helps to QA software and find internationalization related issues early, even before the translation has started. We also have the completeness plugin, which allows us not to save files which are not fully translated. This is something that we use for our marketing materials. we do not want to generate semi-translated pages. We don't want to offer that experience to our users when they read the fully translated page, and then all of a sudden some of the paragraphs is in English. So what we do and what this plugin does is it prohibits or allows saving a localized file only if it meets the certain translation threshold. For our website, we set the translation threshold to 1.0, which is 100%. So only when each particular file is fully translated, only then it is allowed to be saved and then committed to the version control. So this is not the entirety of the plugins, not entirety of the functionality of Serge. You can go to serge.io and read all the documentation and download instructions. You can also browse the sources. In sources, you will see the T folder, which contains tests for different plugins and variants of tests for each plugin. And those tests are actual Serge configuration files with some sample files and some outputs. So you can look at them, you can run them, and you can use them as a source of for your experiments and for your configuration files. So I think this is it. I'm not sure how much time we have for questions, but feel free to ask your questions.
Hi, I'm Masahiro Arai from Gravio. I have some questions. So first of all, I'd like to ask some question about QA process. You mentioned several times about QA. Once things are translated, have QA team to get validated. So my first question is, currently, is the QA process automated, or do you have external manual, testing process?
So this is not like localization, technical localization related. We have the manual QA process. We have some QA automation in place. The QA automation actually has the way to test localized versions of our clients and to see if there are any problems with the layout, if they see English strings instead of the localized ones. So they have an access to our database and they use that for automation. So the answer is, I guess, yes. We use
somewhat yes.
Somewhat yes. We also started to use pseudo localization for QA. For regular manual QA, we usually test this on a couple of languages. Basically, it's English and sometimes Chinese and Vietnamese because our testers are outsourced and this is their native language. So this is easier for them to test in their languages. We also have a practice of reviewing some clients in all languages periodically so that we can find all the inconsistencies in them. So this is the answer.
So are you planning to implement some kind of fully automated process, because that is so powerful when it is integrated with the continuous integrations,
Well, we do this automated process. QA automation is it's not something very simple, and as the software changes, it's pretty hard to keep the pace and update all the automation scripts. But theoretically, if we cover everything with test automation, then we can also test localizations, because we already have this integration between automated QA and the localization framework with the translation database that we have.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi. It would be of interest to see some of the actual output files to see how they look like. More generally, though, I think there's an assumption in here that when you process the file and make the transformation from XHTML to PO files and the like, that you're somehow benefiting the vendor side of the process by streamlining what they see. But the major vendors, at least, and if not almost all of them, use some tools. They still need to create a translation memory on their side for their efficiency. And there's no right answer for how to parse files. So when you remove the information of what the original HTML is and produce these strings, then you're in a sense removing information from the translation vendor, who would have, if they had the original HTML, used tools to parse it in such a way that's consistent with their translation memory and how they present information to their translators. So I'm wondering if you've gotten feedback from any of the LSPs that you work with, and how accepting they are of this approach versus they're being able to use the tools that they're used to and actually to see the kinds of information that may be available in an HTML file as opposed to what you're producing in a PO file and the like. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There are many questions. I'll try to answer all of them. So first of all, we work with just one LSP. They never complained about anything.
Because you're paying them.
Yeah. So yes, removing, extracting strings and presenting them in this sort of rectified way is somewhat removing the context. But this is like a twofold situation. So giving the actual source files to vendors is a pretty dangerous process, because those files could be broken and probably they can see something they should not see. Because, for example, PHP pages can contain the actual code, which can expose some information they shouldn't see. We try, with all our parsers, we try to provide as much context as possible. For example, with our PHP parser, we also specify which tag was that and all the stuff, and all the strings inside those PO files are in the same sequence as they are in the original file. So they at least see, if this is a text, they see the actual text. They don't have to see much of the additional context, what was the actual structure of the page, because for them it could be really a distracting factor for translators, for example. So translators work in a pretty clean environment, but we do provide the context information that we can provide.
But that's not actually true, because, sorry to disagree, but when a translator looks at a string that has been extracted, if you separate out something that's in span from the larger sentence, they may need to change how the...
We never do that.
Okay, so that's why it would be interesting to see what your output looks like.
So our idea is that as you have the full control of segmentation, we never do strings which cannot be translated. So all the strings should make sense. They should be the complete sentence or a complete phrase that can be translated as a whole. Sometimes those strings do contain HTML tags. This is perfectly fine. So if you have a link or you have some bold text in your paragraph, this is totally fine. And translators see that, but they work with full messages. We never break them apart. We never automatically segment strings, for example, paragraphs into.
So where do you break up HTML then in order to segment it?
So by default, we use the actual structure of the HTML of PHP. So everything inside paragraph tags, everything inside headers is translated as a single unit without any further segmentation. But you have the full control whether you want to expose something for translation or not. And you can break things apart into two different segments if you want to. This is something that we control.
Okay.
See, I had a question. I'm trying to understand how Serge is different from a TMS-like world server, which also understands various source file formats and parses out the strings and translates them against TMs and so forth. Is Serge basically sort of a light open source TMS, or is there more to it?
It's a bit more, because by design, it allows you the continuous localization process. And I think I tried to cover that specific thing. So when you send a original source format to your vendor, that uses their favorite TMS, they will return those files back sometime after. But those files can be outdated. You have to merge them. This is the problem. Serge.
But if you're running World Server, your own instance of World Server, does Serge give you any advantage over that?
I'm not that familiar with World Server, to be frank, but my understanding is that whatever you put into their system, into World Server, you get back the same format, right?
Yes.
Okay.
If you set up your parsers that way, yeah.
Okay. So then you have to do something with those files. So what do you do with the localized strings files, for example? You have to put them into the version control. You have to make actual builds from it, right? So does it take time to localize those files, right? So you put some files into the TMS, you get some localized file back a day after, right?
Well, you get it immediately. Any recycled strings you get back immediately.
Sure, absolutely. This is what Serge does as well. But for real translation to happen, it has to happen in some period of time. So within that day, you probably remove some strings from your original English files, and you add some new strings.